Trillions. That's roughly how much the U.S. government spends every year. It's just a staggering number.
It really is. And it affects almost everything, roads, tech, healthcare.
Exactly. So when the rules about how that money gets spent change, well, that's a big deal. And that's what we're diving into today.
We're looking at a, frankly, major overhaul of federal procurement kicked off by President Trump.
And our sources, they're suggesting this is maybe the biggest shakeup in government buying since, what, the 90s?
That's the comparison being made, yeah.
Yeah.
Since the Federal Acquisition Streamlining Act and the Reform Act back then.
Ugh.
So it's significant.
Definitely. We're focusing on two executive orders that came out back-to-back, April 15th and 16th, 2025.
Right.
So our mission for this deep dive, let's figure out what's really changing, why, and what the knock-on effects might be, especially for industries like, say, construction.
Sounds good. Where should we start?
Okay, first things first. What problem is this whole overhaul trying to solve, according to the administration?
So the first order, the one from April 15th, it goes right after the Federal Acquisition Regulation.
The big rule book.
The very big rule book. And President Trump's take is that it's become, and I'm quoting here, an excessive and overcomplicated regulatory framework.
Overcomplicated. So the idea is to
Streamline it. Cut it down to the parts that are, one, required by law, or two, absolutely essential for, sound procurement.
anything that doesn't meet those two criteria.
The stated goal is to remove it. Basically, strip away anything considered non-essential or just unnecessary red tape.
A fundamental simplification, then.
That certainly seems to be the driving principle, yes. Getting rid of regulations that don't directly serve those core goals.
Okay, let's break down those two orders a bit more. That first one, April 15th, targeting the FAR, what specific actions did it mandate?
Well, the headline action is directing the Office of Federal Procurement Policy, the OFPP, which sits inside OMB.
Right, Office of Management and Budget.
Exactly. They've been tasked with leading a huge review and essentially a complete rewrite of the FAR.
A rewrite of the entire FAR, and what's the timeline?
180 days.
Wow. 6 months to redo the government's entire purchasing playbook? That sounds ambitious.
It's incredibly ambitious. Monumental, really.
So what are they hoping to achieve with this rewrite in such a short time? Any specifics mentioned?
Yeah, there are a few key goals laid out. First, rewrite the FAR in plain English,
Okay, make it easier to understand. Less legalese.
presumably. Second, eliminate non-statutory and duplicative regulations. So rules that aren't actually required by a specific law or rules that just repeat something already covered elsewhere.
Clearer language, less repetition. Makes sense.
Yeah.
Now, our sources flag something else, something maybe a bit more controversial.
Yes. There's also a specific directive to, quote, remove DEI and wokeness from the regulations.
Okay, and what might that mean in practice for procurement?
Well, it signals a clear intent to change or get rid of elements that promote diversity, equity, and inclusion. That could mean, for example, removing bid evaluation points for supplier diversity, or maybe requirements about workforce diversity for contractors.
Which could shift who wins contracts?
It certainly could. It might potentially favor, say, larger, more established companies over smaller, diverse businesses that previously benefited from DEI criteria. It's a significant potential shift.
Definitely one to watch. The order also mentioned adding buyer guides instead of some of the old requirements. What are those about?
That sounds like a move towards more practical, maybe user-friendly advice for government buyers. Think less dense regulation, more straightforward guides or checklists for specific types of buys.
So, more how-to, less thou shalt not.
Something like that, perhaps. Replacing burdensome and outdated requirements with more practical guidance.
Now, the FAR isn't just standalone rules. It incorporates some big laws, things like Buy American, Service Contract Act, Davis-Bacon for wages.
Absolutely. Competition and Contracting Act, too. Major stuff.
Our sources noted there's some uncertainty about how those get treated in this rewrite. What's your read on that?
That's a really key point of uncertainty right now. The order says keep what's required by statute, but how these complex acts get integrated or potentially modified in a plain English FAR, that's unclear.
But the administration seems keen on Buy American.
Very keen. They put out a fact sheet earlier in April calling Buy American the epitome of common sense public policy. So it feels likely that the core of Buy American will stay, maybe even be strengthened.
Okay.
But for the others, Service Contract Act, Davis-Bacon, how they fit into this new essential-only framework. We'll have to wait and see how OFPP interprets required by statute and essential.
Let's wait and see here. Let's switch gears to the second order, April 16th. This one was about commercial products.
That's right. This order directs federal agencies, basically, to buy stuff that's already available commercially whenever possible. Off-the-shelf solutions.
So less focus on government-unique, custom-built things.
That's the push. Reduce reliance on those bespoke solutions. The idea is, if there's a good commercial product or service that meets the need, buy that.
Is it an absolute mandate? Buy commercial or else?
Not quite absolute. There's an exception clause. If an agency really needs a unique government system or a custom build, they can do it, but they need a waiver
A waiver for who?
from their agency's designated approval authority. So it implies a higher bar, a justification process you have to go through to not buy commercial.
Okay, so you'd have to make a strong case why off-the-shelf won't cut it.
Exactly. Imagine an agency using some custom software for years. Now, they might have to formally justify why a commercial alternative isn't good enough and get that sign-off.
That could change how agencies think about their requirements pretty significantly.
It really could.
Now, you mentioned earlier, and our sources emphasize this, that we haven't seen procurement reform on this scale since the 90s. Why is that comparison important?
We'll think back to the Federal Acquisition Streamlining Act, FASA, and the Federal Acquisition Reform Act, FRA. Those were huge legislative efforts back then to modernize and, well, streamline federal buying.
Trying to make it more efficient, more like the private sector in some ways.
Exactly. So drawing that parallel now highlights just how ambitious these new executive orders are perceived to be. It signals this isn't just tinkering around the edges, it's aiming for a fundamental reshaping of the process, much like those 90s reforms tried to do.
Okay, so we've got the what the FAR rewrite, the commercial preference, and some of the why, simplification, efficiency. But what about the so what? What are the potential impacts, especially for businesses dealing with the government? Construction Dive flags some concerns.
Yeah, this is where it gets complicated. The lawyers at Denton's wrote about this right after the orders came out, and they highlighted significant regulatory uncertainty.
Which makes sense, given the speed and scope.
Absolutely. If you're a business, especially maybe a smaller one, trying to figure out what rules apply to your next bid when the rulebook itself is being rewritten in 180 days, that creates uncertainty.
Uncertainty isn't exactly great for business planning.
Not at all. And Denton's also pointed to the risk of a fragmented environment.
Fragmented how?
Well, imagine different agencies adopting these reforms at different paces, or maybe interpreting the new, potentially shorter FAR differently.
Ah, so you could end up with a kind of patchwork of requirements.
Precisely. What the Department of Defense requires on a contract awarded next year might look different from what the Department of Transportation needs, even under the same rewritten FAR.
That sounds like a headache for contractors working across multiple agencies.
It could be. Denton suggests this could drive up internal costs for contractors needing different compliance systems, retraining staff for different agency interpretations, rethinking risk management for each contract.
So the goal might be simplification, but the transition could be pretty complex.
That seems like a very real possibility, yes. Navigating federal contracts might become more complicated before it gets simpler.
What about the timeline? You mentioned 180 days for the FAR rewrite, but are there more immediate deadlines we should know about?
Yes, the order set some very quick first steps. Within 15 days of that April 15th order, agencies had to name a senior procurement official to liaise with the FIR Council on this.
Okay, so points of contact are being established.
Right, and the OMB director had just 20 days to issue guidance to agencies on how to start implementing all this.
Wow. 15 days, 20 days, and not wasting any time.
No, it definitely signals a strong push to get this moving very quickly, a real sense of urgency.
And wasn't there another related action around the same time, something about infrastructure projects?
That's right. On the same day as the first procurement order, April 15th, there was a separate order directing agencies to use technology more effectively to speed up permit reviews for infrastructure projects.
Okay, so faster permits, streamlined procurement, it sounds like part of a broader theme.
It does suggest a wider effort across the administration to modernize processes, cut down on delays, and just generally change how the federal government manages big projects and its purchasing.
Okay, let's try and wrap our heads around this. We're seeing a major, fast-paced overhaul of federal procurement,
Definitely.
driven by a desire to simplify what's seen as a complex regulatory mess.
The FAR primarily.
And a big push towards buying commercial, off-the-shelf goods and services.
That's the other key pillar, yes.
But alongside the potential for streamlining, there's also this cloud of uncertainty, potential fragmentation, and real transition challenges, especially for contractors.
That sums it up well. Potential long-term gains, but likely significant short-term hurdles and question marks.
So here's a thought to leave folks with.
Mm.
Given how much the government buys, how might these changes ripple outwards? We talked construction, but what about other sectors? Tech, services? How might a big shift towards commercial products and maybe a different regulatory feel? How might that reshape industries we don't immediately think of?
That's a fascinating question.
Mm.
The downstream effects could be widespread.
And maybe for businesses and even individuals listening, what are the key questions they should be asking right now to get ready for whatever comes next in this changing landscape? What should be on their radar?